Case number 1. Seung-Hui Cho. Let's talk about one of the darkest days in American campus history, and the young man behind it, Seung-Hui Cho. Seung-Hui Cho was born on January the 18th, 1984, in the city of Asan in South Korea. His early years were spent in a cramped basement apartment in Seoul, where his father tried and failed to make a real living running a small bookstore. Hoping for something better for his 2 children, Cho's parents packed up their lives and moved to the United States in 1992, when Seung-Hui was just 8 years old. The family first landed in Detroit, but eventually settled in Centerville, Virginia, a place with a large Korean community. There, his parents opened a dry cleaning business, working long hours to build a new life. They were devout Christians, and Cho was raised in that faith, though later in life he would write bitterly against his parents' beliefs. Even before the family left Korea, relatives back home had noticed something was different about the boy. He barely spoke, rarely showed affection, and wouldn't even make eye contact with his own grandfather. This pattern followed him into his school years in America. Teachers at his elementary school actually saw him as a bright, capable student, someone who finished a 3-year program in a year and a half. But everything changed once he hit middle and high school. He was diagnosed with selective mutism, an anxiety disorder that made it almost impossible for him to speak in certain situations, and later doctors added major depressive disorder to his file. Classmates bullied him constantly, mocking his silence, his accent, and at least once he was targeted because of his ethnicity. Around the same time, in 1999, the Columbine massacre happened, and something about it seemed to fascinate him deeply. He wrote a school assignment expressing a desire to repeat what happened at Columbine. That was enough to alarm the school, who contacted his sister, and Cho was sent to see a psychiatrist. By the time he enrolled at Virginia Tech, Cho carried all of this with him. He started out studying business, but by his senior year had switched to English, hoping to become a writer. His professors, though, were growing increasingly uneasy. The poet Nikki Giovanni had him removed from her class after finding his behavior threatening, describing him as having a mean streak. He would wear sunglasses indoors, stay completely silent when called on, and secretly photograph female classmates under their desks. Another professor, Lucinda Roy, took him under her wing for one-on-one sessions after removing him from Giovanni's class, but she became so uncomfortable that she arranged a code word with her assistant, so that if she ever said the name of a dead professor during a meeting with Cho, her assistant would know to call security. His fellow students found him just as unsettling. Roommates said he barely spoke a word to them. He invented an imaginary girlfriend he called Jelly, describing her at different times as a supermodel living in outer space. He once told a roommate he'd been vacationing with Vladimir Putin. On 2 separate occasions, female students reported him to campus police for unwanted contact, and both times police gave him a verbal warning. In one of those cases, after being warned to stop contacting a woman, Cho sent an email to a friend of hers saying he might as well kill himself. That message triggered a police response. In December of 2005, campus police brought him in for a psychiatric evaluation. A doctor who examined him found he had a flat affect and a depressed mood, but noted that he denied having suicidal thoughts and appeared to have normal judgment. Still, a judge determined he was in imminent danger to himself and ordered him into outpatient treatment. But because of a gap in how Virginia's mental health system worked, nobody ever followed up to make sure he actually got that treatment. And because he had only been ordered into outpatient care, rather than being involuntarily committed as an inpatient, he remained legally allowed to purchase firearms. In the months leading up to the shooting, Cho quietly bought 2 handguns, a Walther P22 and a Glock 19, from licensed dealers, passing background checks both times because his mental health order never showed up in the system. He also picked up extra ammunition magazines and hollow point bullets online. On the morning of April 16, 2007, Cho opened fire in a dormitory, killing 2 students. Hours later, after mailing a package of photos, videos, and a written manifesto to NBC News, he crossed campus in Norris Hall, chained the doors shut behind him, and killed 30 more people in the space of about 9 minutes before turning the gun on himself as police broke through. In total, 32 people lost their lives, making it the deadliest school shooting in American history at that time. His package to NBC contained a rambling, incoherent manifesto raging against wealth, privilege, and people he described as deceitful. He referenced the Columbine shooters as martyrs and compared his own death to a form of martyrdom. Investigators later said the material offered almost no real insight into his motive, and one forensic psychiatrist described it as a performance rather than an explanation. In the aftermath, Governor Tim Kaine ordered a full investigation. The resulting report spent more than 20 pages detailing every missed opportunity, criticizing the university, the mental health system, and gaps in the state's gun laws, while still holding Cho ultimately responsible for his own actions. His family went into hiding, eventually cutting off contact with almost everyone outside their immediate circle, including relatives back in South Korea. Case number 2, Elliot Rodger. Now, let's move to California, and to a young man named Elliot Rodger, whose crimes would go on to shape an entire dark corner of the internet. Elliot Rodger was born in London in July of 1991. His father, Peter, was a filmmaker who directed commercials, and his mother, originally from Malaysia, had worked as an on-set nurse for major Hollywood productions. The family lived comfortably, first in England and then, when Elliot was 5, they relocated to an upscale neighborhood in Los Angeles. His parents divorced when he was 7, and not long after, his father remarried a French actress. From a very young age, Elliot struggled socially. As a small child, he avoided other kids at recess, whispered instead of speaking normally, and once broke down crying simply because of the crowds at Disneyland. As he got older, these struggles didn't go away. In 1999, his mother described him in a legal filing as a high-functioning autistic child, though his father disputed that diagnosis. Eventually, in 2007, he was formally diagnosed with a developmental disorder that fell under the autism spectrum, though he didn't meet the full criteria for autism itself. He became increasingly self-conscious about his height, his slim build, and his mixed-race background, at one point dyeing his hair blonde in an attempt to fit in. Rodger became fixated, from a young age, on wealth and status as the key to being desirable to women. As he moved through middle school and high school, bullying pushed him further into isolation, and he began pouring hours into video games instead of socializing. When puberty hit, he developed what he described as an overwhelming sex drive, alongside a growing conviction that he would never actually have a relationship. Over the years, his frustration curdled into resentment, first toward specific people, and eventually toward women as a group, and toward men he saw as more successful with them. He drifted through several schools and colleges without finishing much of anything, eventually enrolling in Santa Barbara to attend college near the University of California campus. It was there that his isolation and anger deepened dramatically. Roommates described him as detached and openly hostile, with one filing a request to be moved out of the apartment, describing Rodger as having serious psychological problems and saying he feared for his own safety. Rodger began writing about wanting to punish the people around him for what he saw as their happiness and his own suffering. He started stalking the idea of a day of retribution, an attack he would plan and delay for roughly 2 years. During this time, his family tried repeatedly to get him help. He saw a psychiatrist with prescribed medication he refused to take, worked with paid counselors, and even had a life coach hired specifically to help him build social skills. In one meeting, his mother was told there wasn't much more she could do, and that the best path forward was to support his wish to stay in Santa Barbara and finish school. Around the same time, he was quietly buying firearms, 3 handguns in total, along with ammunition, and visiting shooting ranges to practice. Just weeks before the attack, his mother discovered disturbing videos he had posted to YouTube and alerted a crisis hotline, prompting a welfare check from several sheriff's deputies. But because the officers didn't enter his apartment or ask about weapons, and because Rodger calmly assured them everything was fine, they left without taking any action. Rodger later said that if they had searched his apartment, they would have found his firearms and his written plans, and the entire attack would have been stopped before it started. On May 23, 2014, Rodger first murdered his 2 roommates and a visiting friend inside their shared apartment, stabbing all 3 to death. He then drove to a sorority house, intending to kill as many people inside as he could, but couldn't get through the door. Instead, he shot 3 women walking nearby, killing 2 of them, before driving to the town of Isla Vista, shooting bystanders and hitting others with his car. After a brief exchange of gunfire with police, in which he was wounded. He crashed his car and was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. In total, he killed 6 people and injured 14 others. Minutes before the attack, he had emailed a sprawling 137-page document to dozens of people, describing his life, his resentment toward women, and disturbing fantasies about controlling and imprisoning them. He also uploaded a video announcing his intention to punish women for rejecting him. In the years since, disturbing corners of the internet have held him up as a symbolic figure, and his name has been referenced by other attackers who followed in his footsteps. Case number 3, Christopher Harper Mercer. Our third case takes us to a small community college in Oregon and to a shooter named Christopher Sean Harper Mercer. On the morning of October 1st, 2015, gunfire broke out at Umpqua Community College near Roseburg, Oregon. The shooting began inside a writing classroom, where Harper Mercer, who was actually enrolled as a student in that very class, fired a warning shot into the hallway before forcing his classmates into the center of the room. Witnesses later described him deliberately sparing one student, instructing that student to deliver a package to the police once it was all over. What followed was harrowing. He shot the professor at close range. He reportedly asked some of his other victims about their religious beliefs before continuing to fire, though their answers didn't seem to change what happened next. One woman was shot multiple times while trying to shut the classroom door. Another was made to beg for her life. A woman using a wheelchair was killed as she tried to climb back into it after he ordered her out. 2 plainclothes officers arrived within minutes and exchanged gunfire with him, striking him once. After a brief standoff, Harper Mercer retreated back into the classroom and shot himself in the head. In total, 9 people were killed and 8 others were wounded. The package he had given to the surviving student contained his own writings, describing his frustrations at having no friends, no job, and no romantic relationships, and expressing admiration for other mass shooters who had come before him, including Elliot Rodger. He wrote using language associated with an online subculture built around male resentment and social isolation. Harper Mercer was born in 1989 in Torrance, California. His parents separated before he was even born, and he grew up living entirely with his mother, who was described by those who knew her as fiercely protective, often trying to shield him from any kind of minor annoyance or conflict. He briefly joined the Army in 2008, but was discharged after only 5 weeks, reportedly following a suicide attempt during training. He later attended a community college for students with learning or emotional difficulties, and his mother had written online, using an anonymous account, that both she and her son had Asperger's syndrome. The 2 of them moved to Oregon a couple of years before the shooting, and they frequently visited shooting ranges together. Investigators found 14 legally purchased firearms in the apartment they shared, most of them bought either by Harper Mercer himself or by members of his family. He had recently been placed on academic probation at the college after his grades slipped, and he owed money on his tuition. Investigators later described him as harboring anti-religious and white supremacist views, alongside long-standing, largely unaddressed mental health struggles. Because he had never been involuntarily committed, nothing in his background prevented him from legally purchasing his weapons. Case number 4, Anthony Dwayne McCrae. Our fourth case brings us to Michigan State University and to a gunman named Anthony Dwayne McCrae, a man who had no connection to the school at all. On the evening of February 13, 2023, 43-year-old McCrae arrived on the East Lansing campus by bus. He walked through the area for close to an hour before entering a classroom building called Berkey Hall. There, he opened fire in a lecture hall, wounding several students and fatally injuring 2 of them, a professor doing everything he could to hold the door shut against the danger outside. Students shattered windows to escape, and some stayed behind to help the wounded, even improvising a tourniquet out of a belt. Police arrived within minutes, but McCrae had already left the building. He fired another shot outside a nearby building before entering the student union, where he killed one more student near a loading dock entrance. Campus-wide alerts went out telling everyone to shelter in place, and hundreds of officers from multiple agencies converged on the area during a tense, hours-long search. It wasn't until nearly 3.5 hours later that police located a man matching his description walking on a street off campus. When officers approached him, he shot himself. In total, 3 students lost their lives, and 5 others were injured, several of them critically. facing months or years of recovery involving multiple surgeries and permanent disabilities. McCrae had been arrested once before, back in 2019, for carrying a concealed weapon without a permit. He pleaded down to a misdemeanor as part of a deal, which meant that once his probation ended, his ban on owning firearms ended along with it. His father later said that after McCrae's mother passed away in 2020, his son became reclusive, angry, and increasingly detached from everyone around him. He quit the job he'd held for years and grew estranged even from his own sister. Police later found a note on him referencing threats not just against the university, but also against a former workplace and schools back in New Jersey where he had once lived. He also claimed, falsely, to be leading a group of 20 people involved in the attack. In the aftermath, students organized protests calling for stronger gun laws, and the university eventually settled lawsuits filed by the families of those who were killed. Case number 5, 1L, Go. Our fifth case takes us to Oakland, California, and to a former nursing student named 1L, Go. On the morning of April 2, 2012, Go walked into Oikos University, a small Christian college, armed with a .45 caliber handgun and several loaded magazines. He entered a nursing classroom, ordered the students to line up against the wall, and told them he was going to kill them all. He then opened fire, killing 6 students and a receptionist, before fleeing the campus in a car that belonged to one of his victims. He drove to a nearby supermarket and eventually surrendered to police there. In total, 7 people were killed and 3 others were wounded. Go, originally from South Korea, had immigrated to the United States as a child and was later naturalized as a citizen. He'd spent time in Virginia before eventually settling in the San Francisco Bay Area. He had previously been a student at Oikos University but had left the school under difficult circumstances not long before the shooting, and police said he was angry about a tuition dispute and felt he had been mistreated by both staff and fellow students during his time there. In the years following his arrest, the legal process moved slowly. Court-appointed psychiatrists determined that Go had been suffering from paranoid schizophrenia for over a decade and that he lacked the ability to properly understand the legal proceedings against him. As a result, a judge ruled him unfit to stand trial and ordered him confined to a mental institution for treatment, with his competency reviewed every few months. Years passed before he was ultimately found competent enough to enter a plea. In 2017, Go pleaded no contest and was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without any chance of parole. He died in prison in March of 2019. Case number 6, Christopher Darnell Jones, Jr. Our 6th case comes from the University of Virginia, involving a former member of the school's football team, Christopher Darnell Jones, Jr. On a Sunday evening, students were returning by charter bus from a class trip to see a play in Washington, D.C. As the bus pulled into a parking garage on campus, gunfire broke out inside the vehicle. 3 student athletes, all members of the university's football team, were shot and killed, and 2 other students were injured. The victims were identified as linebacker Sean Perry and wide receivers Lavelle Davis Jr. and Devin Chandler. Jones fled the scene, triggering a manhunt that shut down the campus overnight. He was taken into custody the following morning without incident. It later emerged that Jones had already been flagged by the university's threat assessment team earlier that same year. In September, campus officials had received a report that Jones made a comment about owning a gun to someone unaffiliated with the school, though no weapon was ever seen and no direct threat accompanied the remark. He had also been under investigation for alleged involvement in a hazing incident, though that inquiry was eventually closed after witnesses declined to cooperate. That investigation, however, led authorities to discover a prior concealed weapons case involving Jones from a few years earlier. He had been required to disclose that case to the university but never did, and disciplinary proceedings over that failure were still pending at the time of the shooting. People who knew Jones growing up described him very differently. His high school football coach recalled him as well-behaved, with no history of trouble. School records showed he had once been named Student of the Year and served as president of a school club. His mother, reached briefly by reporters after the shooting, asked only for prayers for everyone affected. Jones was charged with 3 counts of second-degree murder, along with weapons charges tied to the shooting. Case number 7, Stephen Kazmierczak. Our 7th case takes us to Northern Illinois University and to a graduate student named Stephen Philip Kazmierczak. Kazmierczak was born in 1980 in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. From a young age, his family life was strained. He developed a lasting rivalry with his older sister that never healed, and his relationship with his mother was similarly troubled, something he continued to resent well into adulthood. Teachers suspected learning and attention difficulties during his school years, and some noticed disturbing themes of violence in his early writing assignments. But when his parents requested a psychological evaluation from the school, it was turned down. Between his teenage years and early adulthood, Kazmierczak's mental health steadily deteriorated. He experienced chronic anxiety, depression, and insomnia, and made several suicide attempts by overdose, leading to 7 separate involuntary hospital stays across different psychiatric facilities. Eventually, his parents placed him in a supervised group home, where he was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder along with traits of a schizoid personality, and he began showing signs of obsessive-compulsive behavior alongside dependence on marijuana. Over time, he stopped complying with treatment entirely, eventually leaving the group home and quitting his medication after faking side effects. He tried a string of short-term jobs, all of which ended due to behavioral issues, before enlisting in the Army in 2001. His military career was cut short almost immediately once officials discovered he had concealed his psychiatric history, and he was given an uncharacterized discharge and sent home. Despite everything, when he enrolled at Northern Illinois University, professors saw him as an outstanding student. He graduated with honors and even co-authored an academic paper on self-harm in prisons with one of his professors. But to his peers, he remained strange and withdrawn, someone who kept almost entirely to himself and seemed consumed by an interest in horror films and violent video games. In the months before the shooting, he was dealing with unresolved grief and anger toward his parents, particularly his mother, who had died a couple of years earlier. On Valentine's Day of 2008, he mailed his girlfriend a disturbing package, including ammunition and a farewell note. That same afternoon, he walked into a lecture hall at Northern Illinois University during an introductory science class and opened fire, killing 5 students and wounding several others in just a few minutes before shooting himself in the head. He had reportedly studied both the Virginia Tech shooter and the Columbine shooters closely in the time leading up to his own attack. His girlfriend later said the man who committed that act was not the person she had known, describing him instead as caring and gentle. Mental health professionals who had treated him over the years painted a more complicated picture, describing someone who resisted acknowledging that he was mentally ill at all and who often concealed the true extent of his history from the people trying to help him. Case number 8, John Ernest. Our 8th and final case takes place at a synagogue in Poway, California. It involves a 19-year-old nursing student named John Timothy Ernest. On April 27, 2019, the final day of Passover, Ernest walked into the Chabad of Poway synagogue carrying a semi-automatic rifle. Inside, he shot and killed 60-year-old Lori Gilbert Kay and wounded the synagogue's rabbi, who ultimately lost a finger in the attack. Ernest then turned toward a side room filled with congregants, including several children, wounding a man and an 8-year-old girl before his weapon apparently jammed, cutting the attack short. 2 members of the congregation moved toward him, and he fled the building. An off-duty Border Patrol agent who was also a member of the synagogue managed to fire at his car as he escaped, though Ernest got away uninjured. He later called 911 himself to report the shooting and was arrested a short distance away without incident. A month before the synagogue attack, Ernest had also attempted to burn down a mosque in nearby Escondido, leaving behind graffiti referencing the perpetrator of the Christchurch mosque shootings in New Zealand. Investigators later connected the handwriting and online activity between both incidents. Ernest had no criminal record before this and no known ties to any organized extremist group. But in the months leading up to the attack, he had begun expressing openly racist and anti-Semitic views to classmates and family members, and investigators said his radicalization traced back roughly a year and a half, beginning with videos and message boards he frequented online. 2 fellow nursing students had reported him to a professor shortly before the attack, though no formal action had been taken by that point. Shortly before the shooting, a lengthy anti-Semitic document was posted online under his name, invoking conspiracy theories about a supposed genocide against a particular race and referencing extremist rhetoric from decades-old literature. He cited other mass shooters as inspirations in the document, and specifically the perpetrators of the Christchurch and Pittsburgh synagogue attacks. Ernest was formally charged with murder and attempted murder, with hate crime and firearm enhancements attached, as well as separate federal charges connected to both the synagogue shooting and the mosque fire. In 2021, he pleaded guilty. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in state court, and received an additional life sentence in federal court, with the 2 life sentences ordered to run one after the other rather than at the same time. In the aftermath, his own parents released a public statement condemning what he had done, saying it brought shame upon their family's history, and confirming that they would not fund his legal defense.